From the Caribbean to the Middle East, from counter-narcotic strategy in the Andes to conflict diplomacy in the heart of the Levant, American statecraft often unfolds far from public view. It is a profession measured not in headlines, but in relationships built patiently over time. Not in rhetoric, but in disciplined judgment under pressure. In embassies where security risks are real, political stakes are high, and U.S. interests are constantly tested, diplomacy becomes both art and endurance. In such environments, representing the United States requires resilience, discretion, and an unwavering commitment to service. Welcome to Brungert Law's Lanyard, where we provide a little extra perspective through conversations with individuals from across the spectrum of society. I'm Maurice Brungert, your host. I enjoy engaging with experienced, knowledgeable, and passionate people for the opportunity it affords to enrich our understanding of the world through their eyes. The more we learn, the more likely we can become better versions of ourselves and guide others towards the same. Today's guest is retired U.S. Ambassador Luis Moreno. Ambassador Moreno spent more than 3 decades representing the United States in some of the most complex and demanding environments. His assignments included, among others, service as U.S. Ambassador to Jamaica, Deputy Chief of Mission in Tel Aviv and Port-au-Prince, Political Military Minister Counselor in Baghdad, and Narcotics Affairs Director in Bogotá, where he played a key role in implementing Plan Colombia. Welcome to the program, sir.
Thank you, Maurice. Thank you. It's a pleasure and an honor to be here.
Well, one, happy Mardi Gras. This is a day we celebrate my hometown, New Orleans. But we're going to get right into this.
That's right.
That's right. But tell our audience a bit about yourself. Where your parents came from and how that led to your entry into the Foreign Service.
Sure. My father was a political refugee from Colombia. He was caught up in, as I think you're familiar with, La Violencia. He was actually caught up in that lot of violence in Bogotá called the Bogotazo, where there were assassinations and all sorts of things. He sort of was on the losing side of things. He was a doctor treating people. He was picked up and arrested and was most likely going to be executed. But because he came from a politically influential family in Boyacá, they gave him the option of leaving the country. He went to New York, where he didn't speak a word of English. His medical degree was not recognized. And he knew virtually no one. He was not a guy who came to the States with $5 in his pocket. I think he had a lot more than $5 in his pocket. He came from a very well-off family. But he really put his nose to the grindstone. He told me he went to movies in Times Square every day to try to practice his English. He got it up to a certain level where he was accepted to New York University Medical School. He met my mother, who had left Cuba for Panama, and from Panama to the States, who was a nursing student. And he forged a life in the U.S. He had 2 sons, both of who dedicated themselves to public service most of their lives. And by the time he passed away, he was on his way to an emergency, to a trauma. He was a really A1 traumatologist, an orthopedic surgeon. He was the chief of orthopedic surgery at Columbia Presbyterian Hospital, chief of surgery at Richard Memorial Hospital on Staten Island. He was one of the guys who led the team for the development of the artificial hip replacement procedure. So he went from a guy who was going to movie theaters to try to learn English to a guy who was a very prominent surgeon by the time of his untimely death. And both his sons joined the U.S. government and spent a career in service. And to me, being a first-generation American, and I guess to my brother, whom you know as well, service was always part of what I felt that one should do. I got into law school at Fordham after graduating, and I decided to join Vista, which was the kind of domestic branch of the Peace Corps. I did a couple of years teaching, and then I passed the Foreign Service test, and I was thrilled to death because serving my country and paying back everything and all the opportunities that my country had given me was a very essential part of my entire being. And when I joined, I was just completely bowled over, being in Washington, D.C., being in training, meeting people. One of the main motivations I had was the hostage crisis situation in Tehran. I was determined to take the Foreign Service test after that. And my mentor was Bruce Langan, who had been the Charge d'Affaires in Tehran, who was hostage. He was a hostage, not in the embassy. They had him in the foreign ministry. And he was a great man. He taught me so much. And just thrilled to death to serve my country for about 35 years.
Out of curiosity, when your father and mother immigrated to the United States, what was the time frame for that?
I'd say the early 1950s.
Okay, all right. So still sort of around the McCarthy era.
Yes, I think I'm towards the tail end of that. Yes, and immigration rules were kind of different. I guess if you could look at it, I'm an anchor baby, and the terminology that some people like to do. Maybe some people would like to take my citizenship away and send me back. But yeah, it was much more undefined back in those days as far as immigrating. And he was welcome with open arms, and he certainly paid off in spades in contributing back to society. And I think to a certain degree, so did his two sons, if I don't say so myself.
And did your parents ever use their experience in the health professions to give y'all teachable moments?
Oh, all the time. One of the things that I remember most is my first day at kindergarten. I was the only kid not crying. Everyone was crying for their mommies and daddies. I was like, let's get this show on the road, because my mother had taught me how to read when I was very young. So by the time I got to kindergarten, I was already reading books. By the time I was in the first grade, I finished the history textbook in like a day, and I asked the nun for more. So education was very important. Also helping people. My old man was a traumatologist, so uh, treating people with all sorts of horrible injuries, responding to emergencies. My mother was an emergency room nurse. So all these things really, service and responding to people in need and education were all important parts of my upbringing.
And when you were an observer, in the sense of watching the news and the hostage crisis, when our diplomats were held in Iran, where were you at the time? Were you at Fordham?
No, I was teaching at Trenton Central High School, one of the toughest high schools in New Jersey, and I was following the events very closely. When someone asks me, "Hey, how did you pass the written test of the Foreign Service? How'd you do that? What is your tip?" And I tell everyone the same thing. I read the newspaper every day from when I was in the seventh grade. I read the newspaper every day. Sometimes the Times, sometimes it was the Daily News, whatever I had time for. But and I watched the news every night. So I was passionate about uh, things going on overseas. And I had hoped to become an Africa expert, because all my outside reading, even as when I was studying political science at Fordham University, was about Africa. I knew everything about, Zimbabwe, about the war in Angola, about all these Algeria. I was fascinated by that stuff, but I spoke Spanish, and so they weren't going to send me to Africa or the Middle East. They were sending me to what unfortunately was very pejoratively known back in those days. You're going to hit the cucaracha circuit. I don't know if that expression was around when you came in, but that's what they said. No, you're going to the cucaracha circuit. So I was sent to Bogota, ironically, for my first tour.
Huh. And well, tell us about that first tour and the lessons you learned there, because I'm sure there were plenty, and I'm sure it must have also been um, sort of emotionally impactful, considering your father came from Colombia.
And I told the department, I said, hey, I've got like a third cousin removed, who's like the minister of the environment and stuff. And they said they didn't pose any objections, which surprised me, quite frankly. I was a good Spanish speaker, so I was kind of the star of the visa line. I started doing 100 interviews a day. I got to know the country very, very well. When you speak to that many people all the time on a constant basis, you learn a lot. And then Pablo Escobar bombed the embassy with a car bomb right on the corner. And unfortunately, I had just interviewed a lady, and I told her we were going to print her visa, and she should go across the street and wait at the coffee shop, and she was killed. She's one of the few casualties that day. But that changed everything. All the people with families or who were married who wanted to leave left. Those young single guys got redistributed, and I was redistributed to the narcotics affairs section of what was then called, I think, not narcotics office or whatever it was. And I became a police advisor overnight. And I started traveling with the Colombian National Police anti-narcotics unit that had just been formed. We had tried to work with the Fiscalia, the Attorney General's office. We tried with the Army, but customs, but we run into all sorts of problems. So we decided to create this new unit inside the Colombian National Police, the Colombian Anti-Narcotics Police. And I was teamed up with Colonel Jaime Ramirez, who was the first boss of that unit, and he became my hero. I traveled all over Colombia with him, raiding Pablo Escobar's, coca fields and laboratories and some of his stash houses. And I learned so much. I flew in helicopters, came under fire, and I loved the whole thing. And then I'd come back to the embassy for a few days, write it up, show the pictures I took, and then I'd go out again. And it was just an amazing experience. And he was, I said, my hero. And unfortunately, when I was in Nicaragua on my second tour, he was killed by Pablo Escobar. And I had always told him that I would go to his promotion ceremony to general when he was colonel. Years later, when I'm director of the narcotics section, during Plan Colombia, I had a meeting with the directors. I was walking back, waiting for my security detail, and they weren't there. So I called them. They were on their way, and I heard a ceremony going on in the auditorium on the first floor. And I said, well, I'll just stick my head and see what it was. It was the posthumous promotion ceremony for Colonel Jaime Ramirez.
Oh, that must have sent chills up and down your spine. The coincidence.
Chills, absolute chills. I had no idea. His wife and kids saw me, and they broke down. They thought I was there, that I had come, all the way from the States just for that. And I told them no, it was just extremely fortuitous, and we renewed our. But that was a really pivotal moment for me to actually be able to complete, as we say in Spanish, with that promise I made him of being there for his promotion ceremony to general.
If you can, please convey to the audience what your impressions were working with Colombian authorities, government officials at that time, taking into consideration how government officials of other countries are portrayed in movies today and over time, generally as all corrupt or untrustworthy, or they don't know what they're doing. And actually, they tend to be a lot more educated and professional than we as a whole give them credit for.
Oh, I can't say enough. I can't tell you how many funerals I went to in Colombia for prosecutors, judges, Army, police, Air Force. So many of them gave their lives for their country. And also, let's be quite honest, for our so-called war on drugs, they gave their lives. Colonel Jaime Ramirez being one of the primary examples of that. You had a guy like President Pastrana, who myself, the ambassador, and Assistant Secretary Beers went in and we sold them the idea of what Plan Colombia is. And he took quite a risk in doing that. And I had known him from when I was a junior officer in 1983 at President Pastrana. We kind of socialized a bit. And he later, he took on the head, and then Uribe came on after him and took a lot of the credit for things that actually Pastrana had done. But as far as sacrifice, professionalism, education, savvy, and dedication. When I got to Colombia, Bogotá was an isolated point in an ocean surrounded by the FARC. You couldn't leave by land to go anywhere because 20 miles outside of Bogotá, you could be picked up in a FARC, roadblock. Luckily, I had the job I had, so I could fly anywhere in the country with helicopters and did. But Plan Colombia, although it was the basic idea behind it was to reduce the amount of cocaine going to the States, reduce coca production through eradication, which was my passion at the time, as controversial as it was. Maybe it didn't work altogether on that, lowering the price of cocaine in the States, lowering the amount of cocaine. But you know what? It saved the oldest democracy in Latin America because it freed them from the grip that the FARC had on them by modernizing the army and the police, by giving them Black Hawk helicopters, by giving them training, by creating a special army counter-narcotics brigade. And by the way, with a lot of human rights training, because back in those days, we were very, very strict about enforcing human rights. And that really brought Colombia back from the brink, and we broke the hold that they had on Colombia. We took down the Medellin cartel and Pablo Escobar. We took down the Cali cartel, and we really scattered all that stuff to the wind. Unfortunately, our success in Colombia is directly related to the rise of the cartels in Mexico, because the Colombians lost their grip on all the distribution routes and all the control of drugs going into the States, and that was taken over by the Mexican cartels, and that's why they grew to what they are now. So it's kind of ironic. Success in Colombia led to the rise of the cartels in Mexico. But remember, Plan Colombia wasn't just repression, excuse me. It's not a Freudian slip. It involved development, economic development, job creation, also the creation of casas de justicia, or courthouses, hospitals, schools, because in many of these remote areas, the coca growing areas, the de facto government was the FARC. They were the ones who administered justice, who decided things, who ran the economy, et cetera, et cetera. So a lot of Plan Colombia in helping the Colombians establish control again was all these development programs where USAID played an absolutely crucial role, as it had many places where I served. USAID was key in Haiti. USAID was key when I was in Israel, and I was an observer of the Oslo Accords roadmap. I was the deputy director of that. And what USAID did, and it's such a shame of what happened to USAID over the past couple of years.
What lessons were learned from that in terms of what worked, what was misunderstood at that time, and its relevance to today?
Well, I think one of the things that most was concerning was, the things like popular culture in the U.S., like a clear and present danger, where like all the Colombians were bad guys, even the guys in the cops, et cetera, et cetera. And yes, corruption is a problem in Colombia. It's a problem in Mexico, and by the way, it's a big problem in the United States as well.
Yes,
as we've been seeing. So I think that people don't realize the effort that we went into Colombia, and I think it's undersold. In some circles, it's oversold as the greatest, foreign policy victory in the past 50 years. But in a lot of places, it's undersold. And that initiative that we took with the Colombians resulted in having the third largest foreign assistance program after Israel and Egypt. And ironically, a few years later, I was in charge of administering a lot of the programs in Israel. But the third after Israel, and we did it kind of ad lib to a great extent. I mean, I was given $3 billion or something that first year, and I had the same staff I had when our budget was 50 million. So we had to create an infrastructure very quickly, and we had to use contractors we had to stretch, the interpretation of what of I put a really very high premium on ethics that we talked about previously, and I won in 2000. I won the award for dissension because what I did, I called in the inspector general on my own program because I said that some people in the police were misusing U.S. government funds and pocketing them. And I said I wanted a full accounting of my own program to see where that money was disappearing to. And boy, did I get pushback on that. And that's why I ended up having the second largest security detail after the ambassador in Colombia. And actually had to leave for a while because there were very verified threats against my life. But that's another thing. When you create, you throw all this money at a problem and you don't expand, it's a bad word, but you don't adjust the bureaucracy to handling all these things, there are going to be places where things are going to slide off and get away from you. And whereas unethical people will take advantage. You talk about leadership. One of the things that's important in something like that is to sell your team on what your vision is. And I always said, we will account for this money. We don't want to see money going out the back door. And I had to get my core team involved in that and to buy into that and listen to what they had to say about it. And, we all felt the same about it in the end. And that really helped us get to the bottom of a lot of stuff that shouldn't have been going on.
Now, all this kind of, did it help prepare you for your next set of assignments, which dealt with refugee operations and sort of the humanitarian side of diplomacy?
Absolutely. Especially working with USAID, which was eye-opening to me. They said that the Minister of Defense at the time was also a guy named Luis Moreno. And we would go out and do public relations on a massive scale to sell Plan Colombia to the Colombian people and to the U.S. government. I must have talked to every single congressman or senator at one point during the stretch where we were trying to sell it. And he would talk about the development part, and I would talk about the helicopters and the training of the military. So he was Luis Moreno el Bueno, and I was Luis Moreno el Malo. And that's how it is. What it taught me, and my next tour was Haiti during a very, very, very violent time, extremely violent time, where I had to make decisions about drawdowns, where I had to make decisions about life-affecting decisions on who was. One of the worst things that you have to do is decide when you have a big drawdown, who stays and who goes, who's considered essential. And you may hurt people's feelings, but you know what? When you're in a situation like that, you really have to not let that bother you and just get the people that you think will most be effective in dealing in a life. And, we were doing stuff that was really very risky. We were observing opposition rallies that would be attacked by the government, gunfights, and we had people on the ground. And when you're putting people at risk like that, you have to really trust their judgment. So a guy who's not really a political officer, say, who's not really all that, has good intentions, good, smart drafter, excellent analyst, et cetera, but maybe he's not that street smart. And you don't want to put him in a situation where he has to decide, I should walk this one more block, I should go up to the third floor with binoculars and look. If you don't trust him to do that, not because of any deficiency, but because of experience or whatever, that's going to hurt that guy's feelings. But you can't worry about that. You got to put in the best people.
For context, what was your position in Haiti and what was the time period?
I was DCM from 2001 to 2004.
Deputy Chief of Mission.
Yeah, and in fact, I was acting ambassador for a large part of that time. And it was the time when there was an open revolt against Aristide. The rebels came in from across the border. It's just a lot of massacres and killings, and the embassy was in the middle of it. We had to have a drawdown. We had to have the fast Marines come in. And it's the same thing that happened 10 years before when I was in Haiti, when I was the refugee coordinator slash political military officer, where we had a drawdown and we had to bring in the fast Marines, et cetera. So it's just a repeat. And I was lucky enough to have my good friend James Foley as the ambassador, and I could advise him from a position of experience because I had lived through all this 10 years before. So yeah, there were a lot of lessons learned. There were a lot of tension. So a lot of bad stuff going on, and Haiti has been a big part of my life ever since. I was accused of kidnapping the president. I don't know if you're familiar with that story. I think I saved his life, but according to some people, I kidnapped him. I talk about and write about Haiti a lot. I speak to people in Haiti on a regular basis, sometimes on a daily basis, definitely on a weekly basis. I attend Mass electronically from City Soleil every Sunday. So Haiti, like many of us who serve in Haiti, it gets in your blood and you really care about the Haitian people who are as noble and hardworking and deserving people as I've ever seen. And so when I saw all the stuff about eating cats and dogs and all that stuff about or trying to reject their or annul their temporary protective status, and when I happen to know how bad Haiti is right now, all those things really kind of get to me.
Well, let's touch on that more broadly, and that is, what would you like to say to audiences about the importance of maintaining a diplomatic mission in Port-au-Prince, Haiti, a country that is just overcome with poverty, crime, violence, instability. And this has been going on for decades. It's kind of like, the juice ain't worth the squeeze, so to say. And then on the opposite side of that, why should we allow migrants from Haiti? What are they going to bring to the table here in the United States?
Well, you see that Haitian immigrants who came here under the temporary protective status program, they virtually saved Springfield, Ohio. You know who's a big fan of Haitian immigration, although he doesn't say it very much, is Governor DeWine. I had the privilege of escorting Governor DeWine when he was Senator DeWine, and he is really involved, very involved in a group called Hands Together, run by Father Tom Hagen. He's got a big school named after Governor DeWine's daughter, Becky. They're hardworking. They are extremely noble, as I said, very vibrant. They are not, for the most part, criminals. The criminals are back in Haiti, and the Haitians who we did deport, that we back, previous administrations, we did deport hardcore Haitian criminals back to Haiti, which those of us in the embassy, were kind of like iffy on because we knew they would go and use their expertise with the Haitian gangs who were readily accepted them. But if we're on a skeletal staff. We have a charge, Henry Wooster, now in Port-au-Prince, who is one of the most talented, experienced diplomats who has done previous tour in Haiti, great background. We need to have someone on the ground to tell us what's going on, because we cannot rely, because the media is the same way. The only time Haiti ever gets any press coverage is when CNN goes there, or the New York Times, otherwise, under normal times, they're just depending on stringers. And the Haitian transitional government is having all sorts of problems. The U.S. Embassy, believe it or not, even though a lot of people say it's meddlesome, they're part of the problem. And in the past, that's kind of true. But the U.S. Embassy also is a stabilizing force in many respects. People are going to ask the Americans in the embassy, what can we do? How can we? And many times, and I saw it personally, and participated in it personally, we try to mediate. We spoke the rebels from coming out of Port-au-Prince, coming into Port-au-Prince and fighting that last night where I took President Aristide to to the airport at his own request. So we're a force of a certain amount of good and a certain amount of bad in the past. But I think we need to have people on the ground. We can't have too many because it's so dangerous. So going with a skeletal staff is really worth it. As far as why should we protect people? If someone, it's like my father, right? He left because he was going to be killed, and we have patients who got to the United States because they have relatives there, because if not, their life was extreme danger. And they got temporary protective status, which I think should be respected. So, to say that temporary protective status is not valid anymore because Haiti's safe, Haiti is as dangerous and as unsafe as it's ever been right now.
If you had to say, what would be the strategic importance of Haiti for the United States?
Well, Haiti is a big transit point for illicit narcotics, and I know we got rid of President Maduro in Venezuela because supposedly for the narcotics trade, right? The old it's a major transshipment point used by Colombian cartels to move stuff either towards the Dominican Republic and Puerto Rico and up from there, or actually going directly up to the. So it's a massive transit point for that. It's also a stability point. We had the Haitians taking a massive amount of oil from Maduro during their Petrocaribe program that they wielded like a very heavy foreign policy tool that they used. Uh, the instability could spread or has spread to Jamaica, the guns for ganja business, and all sorts of things. And also, quite frankly, on a humanitarian basis, what's going on in Haiti. I always comment to people when I spoke about Haiti. Haiti is, a 15-minute plane ride from Miami, Florida. How can we, in all good sense, not help people who are just in such miserable conditions, dying literally from starvation in many cases? How can we not help them? I just find, when I was acting ambassador, or even when I was DCM, I made junior officers, I made it a requirement when the Marines and the peacekeeping force held Cité Soleil, which happens to be one of the worst neighborhoods in the world that you can possibly believe. It's built on a garbage dump. It used the garbage dump as landfill on Port-au-Prince Harbor, and it's the home of just incredible poverty. It's mind-boggling, filth, gangs. It's just unbelievable. And I made it a mandatory visit because some kids who were on the first tour had never seen anything like that. When the Marines left, we had to discard that program. But I think you really have to see. I don't see how any sentient human being, could not be adversely affected by looking at what's going on in Haiti.
Well, discussing that briefly, wouldn't that be more appropriate for, say, nonprofits as opposed to the U.S. government?
Yes, well, nonprofits are a vital part of that. Yeah, but we can support that, and we can platform that, and we can work with the NGOs. It's part of what USAID did, right? Because they have the expertise, and they can supplement or guide the NGOs in what their duties are. Believe me, I'm a big fan of the NGOs in Haiti. I helped evacuate 40 handicapped Haitian orphans, and it was a Herculean task, believe me. And I helped evacuate them to an orphanage in Jamaica, where they weren't being persecuted by gangs and had enough medicine and food to eat, which they didn't have in Haiti. Uh, so yeah, sure, NGOs, but NGOs can be supported by the U.S. government. I don't see anything uh, inappropriate of that.
Do you see there's a potential vacuum for others to occupy if we were to abandon a country like Haiti, i.e., would you see a country like China or Russia or whomever uh, opting to exploit a place like Haiti, or do they overlook it?
No, they don't overlook. As a matter of fact, the Russians have been upping their game in Haiti. And it's not just Haiti. If you look about the withdrawal of USAID when it was disintegrated in the past year, excuse me, uh, not only are we leading people to humanitarian disasters, and that's been really well documented in over the last few months, but we're creating a vacuum, as you say, and an opportunity. Let me give you a solid example. Miramar, they had a terrific earthquake right after uh, they started destroying USAID, just articulating it however you want to put it. We had a DART team, a disaster assistance response team, ready to go, but they didn't have the funding to go. So they didn't go. But you know who sent a quick reaction force and whatever? The Chinese. And the Chinese completely took over the assistance to Myanmar, potentially explosive area of the world where our influence stabilizes, it gives us influence in South Sudan. The Russians have moved in after we moved out all our humanitarian efforts in West Africa, in East Africa. We withdrew our disease prevention programs. And who moved in? The Chinese and Russians, and in some places, the Iranians. So we are conceding. Look what happened with the whole problem with Iran when, after we had destroyed again the voice of America and our Farsi language programs, right? Uh, they had to call them, they had to try to find Farsi speakers to be able to do that. So we've been kind of cutting off our nose to spite our face type of thing, and especially in humanitarian things, it's not just being good, which I happen to think is a good thing, but it's also in our national interest. We call it soft power, but in many regards, it's just smart power.
Shifting gears, tell us about your time as political military minister counselor in Baghdad.
Right. After I left Israel, they recruited me to go to Baghdad as to be the head of all our political advisors with all the different commands throughout Iraq, and also kind of serving as the main liaison between the commanding officer and the embassy. First kind of military boss I had was General Odierno, and then later General Austin, who both of whom I enjoyed tremendously. And we had a lot of moving parts because it was when we were drawing down our military presence and shifting all the things that the U.S. military did to the Iraqi government, the embassy, uh, NGOs, private sector, everything from collecting garbage in West Baghdad to keeping the lights on in another part of the country, paying the sons of Iraq who were crucial in keeping ISIS in its place, and all those other things. I forget how the exact number. It was like 1,793 things that the U.S. military was doing that we had to shift because the military was going on. So I got to travel all over the country, got to travel with the commanding general and the entire staff, the ambassador. I was kind of the interpreter, what the State Department was trying to say to the military and to what the military is trying to say to State Department. So I mean, in my career, I had a lot of experience working with the U.S. military, and I used that to my had a gigantic staff. We also did all the analysis on Al Qaeda and ISIS, and we had those responsibilities as well.
Tell us about civil military alignment in the sense of where it succeeds and where it strains. I mean, these were sort of, in one sense, unique times, but if you look across history, not necessarily, because we did similar activities during World War II and in other conflict areas. But for your time there, your direct experience, what did you find was successful as a civil military team, and also what was not, what just didn't work?
Sometimes the cultural differences were very difficult to overcome. Uh, Even things like acronyms and even things like perception and the way things are done, the civilian side, especially State Department, USAID, et cetera, are comfortable with gray, right? The gray area of coming to decisions and policies. Whereas in the military, things are more black and white. And to construct that bridge and explain to big policymakers and the deciders how to move people a little bit more to the gray side and how to move people a little bit more to the black and white side. That's really crucial. And where the rubber meets the road are things like provincial reconstruction teams, where we had State Department officers working hand in hand on the street with military guys on reconstructing everything from local police infrastructure to electricity, et cetera, education, et cetera, et cetera. So in the old days, when I first started, even being a political military officer was, you kept seeing the same 12 people all over the place, kind of like considered nutcases by the State Department. But over the years, the people, it became much more important, the political military world. And to this day, now being in political military affairs is kind of a big deal and very necessary. And the whole Paul Mill Bureau is now like mainstream. And in the past, I'm going way past, I'm an old guy, but going way past, it was not a kind of a mainstream. It was kind of considered out of the mainstream. But now people realize that with such big bureaucracies, such differences, cultural differences, linguistic differences, everything, and to try to bridge that and have political military officers and the military's version of civil military officers, affairs officers, I think it's absolutely crucial. I saw it in Haiti when we were doing the repatriations, right? And Gitmo. I spent a lot of time in Gitmo when we had to bring a lot of the Haitian migrants to Gitmo for processing. And the military, civilian, a lot of liaison work, and some worked and sometimes it didn't.
Working with the U.S. military in Iraq, if you can recall, what what was one takeaway that you developed observing how the military operated? And likewise, what do you think they took away from their experience, their engagement with you?
I think that what they took away from it is that we have specialized knowledge. We had foreign area expertise. One of the specialties you can have in the military is foreign affairs officers. They have to realize that sometimes in a country, there's going to be experience that the State Department offices have, resources, whether it be intelligence, political information, the liaison ability to reach out to the Ministry of Defense, Ministry of Foreign Affairs, handling crisis situations, like when there's collateral damage. When the U.S. military went into raid to get a high value target and ended up killing 10 civilians, say. Well, it's not going to be the military spokesperson who's going to try to fix that. It's got to be the embassy guys who have Arabic speakers, have people who know contacts with the Iraqi media, et cetera, those type of things. Corruption things. Military would look on Iraqi corruption in a different way than kind of the State Department, USAID guys did. So bridging all those things, I think they learned a lot from us. And I know we learned a lot of things about accountability, responsibility, discipline, staying in one's lane, and protection, force protection being absolutely vital for the U.S. military. And I think that's a lesson that we all could afford to learn.
Um, Tangentially, what would you say about Clausewitz's comment that war is simply diplomacy by other means?
I just read an article about this. I think it was yesterday. That old Prussian, the Prussian philosophy, and that. Yeah, it's absolutely true. And when you saw a list come out yesterday, or the weekend of universities that DoD or Department of War or whatever you want to call it cannot, you can't get a scholarship or study at these places. All the Ivy League schools were there. And I saw my Fordham University on there, which surprised me, and Georgetown. And I think that not letting military officers study at civilian universities is a very big mistake. It's not trying to politicize or make it partisan. No, but politics is war. War is politics. Yeah, I believe that a soldier is a political instrument with a rifle in his hand. I think it's very hard to separate. I mean, what's the whole thing about intervention in Iraq or the entire Afghan experience or even taking Maduro out? That's all an extension of policy.
Hmm. Um, Now you've had these variety of experiences, and as you then transition to your role as U.S. ambassador to Jamaica, going into it, how prepared did you find yourself to now be, the president's representative in a foreign country?
It was kind of easy for me, to be honest, easy and hard. It was easy in the sense that I had been acting ambassador in Israel for over a year and a half. I mean, and that is unbelievable in of itself. At any given time, you've got 50% of Congress. I remember one summer we had like 90% of the U.S. Congress either on a APAC trip, a CODEL, or a private trip. I think it was almost closer to 100%. So you talk about being scrutinized. And in a place like Israel, where I was acting ambassador, it's one of the few embassies where you don't run it in the embassy, right? Policy and everything else is dictated from Washington. So you're kind of the transmitter of U.S. policy, whereas in other places, I was acting ambassador in Haiti during some very difficult times, but I had large input. I was acting ambassador in Spain during the Edwin Snowden mess, and I actually got called on the carpet for it for me. So I had a lot of experiences being as the head of a mission, but it was difficult. And actually, I'd be at meetings and say, "Well, the ambassador said," and I didn't realize they were talking about me. You know, they say, "Well, what does the ambassador think?" I said, "Yeah, well, what does he think?" I'll have to ask him. Oh no, they're talking about me. Literally, that happened to me a lot. So then there's empowerment. When you're the top guy, you got to empower your number two, especially. Got to listen to feedback. But in the end, you got to sell your vision, your philosophy, what's in the presidential directive you get that every ambassador gets when he takes his position. He said, and I remember some lessons. I remember, pushing that ethical thing when there was an effort for a cell phone company to be licensed by the Jamaican government, and to us, we had information that cell phone company was dirty as hell, and I went ballistic. I went full bore. I was confrontational in meetings with host government officials. I was very aggressive and forward-leaning with the media, and a guy came up to me, one of my political officers. And because I always try to have this open endorsement, he said, "Sir, this may be a case where we need to use honey more than vinegar. Maybe you should soften the approach." And he told me in such a way that made absolute sense to me. And I gradually, threw things down. And when I left, it worked out, in our favor. So, yeah, there's always something to learn.
For the benefit of the audience, what do you think they should know in terms of the importance of the Caribbean that you learned through your experiences being in Colombia, Haiti, and now U.S. ambassador to Jamaica? I mean, can we consider the Caribbean as a whole as sort of America's third border?
Yes, we often use that expression. And if you, to remind you that when I was ambassador to Jamaica, President Obama came and did an official visit, which real highlight of mine. I had spent some time with him in Israel when he was a candidate, and then he came as president before the Summit of the Americas. And it is a major transshipment point. It's a major economic development point. One of the big things I did in Jamaica was we got Fortress Energy to sponsor a $1 billion project for liquid natural gas that the United States economy benefited from, United States consumers benefited from, and the entire Caribbean had a innate natural source of liquid natural gas in the Caribbean. Also, in countering the Cubans and the Venezuelans, the drug traffickers, it is a third part of our border, and we always talk about that. Also, the international organization aspect of it. We need countries like Jamaica to vote with us in the UN and counter the Cubans and Venezuelans and the Russians and the Chinese. We're also involved in tremendous competition with the Chinese for economic and political. I would always tell my economic officers, for instance, look, we can't compete with the Chinese. We can't take a suitcase full of money into the meeting with the Minister of Transportation. I'm just using a hypothetical example.
Yes.
Uh, we have ethics and we have rules, and that's part of what we're selling. We're selling our way of doing things. We're selling our military programs. We're selling our military training. We're selling our military hardware. And we're also selling our way of life, our democracy, our integrity, and our ethical practices. And it's all what's made us get ahead in the world.
Where do you see our influence today in the Caribbean?
I see this diminished. I think that you can't call countries, crap hole countries. I think that diminishes our relationship. I think that the way things were done in Venezuela could have been handled better. I think the attacks on fishing boats are really, either you want to call it extrajudicial killings or you want to call it just plain piracy or murder or whatever you want to call it. I haven't seen any evidence, credible evidence, that those were actually drug stuff headed to the U.S. In fact, all of them were headed out towards the east or to other areas. None of them had the capability or range to reach the United States. And in fact, some of the boats that had been washed up in the Guajira Peninsula in Colombia, there were traces of marijuana. No traces. There's certainly no fentanyl in any of these cases. That's coming through Mexico, from China, and through illegal ports of entries. So that's it. And we also lost a lot of faith in the Orlando Hernandez pardon. He was charged with the same exact things that Maduro was charged with, and yet he was pardoned. Exact same charges, exact same. And now the pressure's on Cuba. We're trying to force the Mexicans to cut back humanitarian assistance to the Cubans. Cubans are so bad now that, pardon me, they can't refuel jet airliners in Havana anymore because we have a stranglehold. So what are we going to do about that? Are we going to ride it out softly, or are we going to go in and do something precipitate? I mean, no one knows. So there's a sense of, and of course, the Haiti situation, which no one seems to be addressing. We allocated some money for a gang repression force, but that hasn't materialized. So there's a lot of uncertainty, and the old alliances are somewhat fraying. So there's tension and a sense of not knowing what's coming next.
So, do you think taking such a hardline stance with um, Venezuela could prove to backfire?
Well, I'm challenged to see what the positive side of this. You have Delcy Rodriguez, who was also considered a conspirator in many ways of what Maduro was doing, and a hardliner is in. You still have the Minister of Defense, and you still have, of course, what's his name, the Minister of Interior, and they are as repressive and as bad as ever, and yet they say, we've been saying that they've been doing a good job. And the oil is flowing to a certain degree, flowing to offshore accounts and accounts in Qatar. And yet Venezuela remains unchanged. The drug flow is the same of drugs coming into the U.S. So I don't know what the end game is. And that's what concerns me about Cuba. How are we going to play that? What is the plan? And that really hasn't been articulated other than, let's strangle them. But just, no one wants to see the communist regime stay in Cuba. But what's the plan? How are we going to do that? How are we going to do this without inflicting massive humanitarian stress on the people of the island? So it's, like I said, there's a lot of unknowns and a lot of concern and basically a bit of fear on what's coming next because of what happened in Venezuela, because of what's going on in Cuba, because of Haiti.
If you had to comment in any way, what would be the upside of the current administration's actions in the Caribbean? What would you say it is?
You're really putting me against the wall here, Maurice. Getting the funding for the Haitian gang suppression force, but we're not stepping, just like Biden did and Obama, we're not stepping up to the plate on leading that force. Putting pressure on Cuba is good in a way, but again, there's nothing that's being articulated. But yes, regime change in Cuba would certainly be a good thing. Regime change in Venezuela would be a positive thing. But what we're doing is we're alienating the very people that we need. When we had this thing going on with Gustavo Petro, accusing him of being a trafficker and being a nutcase and blah, blah, blah. Yeah, I know they kissed and made up, but you needed Petro to be able to put pressure on Venezuela. The whole pressure on conducting unilateral military action in Mexico, which I think would be absolutely, totally disastrous, when you need the Mexicans to be able, they're the ones providing all the humanitarian assistance to the Cubans. Why alienate them instead of talking with them and trying to work something out? Threatening Panama. And the whole thing with Greenland, which just boggles the mind. And of course, are deserting NATO, are deserting Ukraine. To me, it seems like we're doing a lot of things that are the equivalent of shooting ourselves in the foot.
Do you see any parallels to the interventions the U.S. government engaged in the past in Latin America that ended up leading to some of the adversarial regimes that propped up over time, whether it was in Nicaragua, Cuba, that we could actually be, repeating history, and we're setting up, the future to just repeat what happened over the last 50, 60 years.
I find it unbelievable that I was PNG'd from Cuba. I was from Nicaragua. I was kicked out at my second tour. I was accused of being a CIA, the boss of the CIA, which is quite a compliment for a second tour officer. And the head of Nicaragua was the dictator, Daniel Ortega. Now I'm an old man, and who's in charge of Nicaragua is Daniel Ortega. I just find that mind-boggling, and that has to be, consistent U.S. failure on not being able to exploit, the victory of Violeta Chamorro and other things that happened. Yes, we're committing many of the same mistakes, and we're, by leaving the entire Delcy Rodriguez regime in place and telling people that she's doing a superb job and everything's fine, et cetera, et cetera. And it looks like we just went in there to get oil. And that democracy, the shunning of Maria Corina, which is kind of shocking to me. She even gave her Nobel Peace Prize. And now she's being kind of shunted aside. What about democracy? I mean, that's what we always stood for, democracy. and now that seems to be a secondary effect in Nicaragua, in Venezuela, and in Cuba. What's the game plan there?
Well, I think one could also sort of make an argument that, you know, we've been for democracy, but the United States has been sort of its own walking oxymoron. I mean, we brought in former Nazis to develop our rocket program for NASA. We had segregation. You keep going farther back. We deprived the Native American Indians in Oklahoma and elsewhere of their mineral rights that we agreed to in treaty. Then go further back and took lands from them, and then the founding of the country. We accounted for the institution of slavery within the constitutional framework. Something I would always convey to folks when I had the privilege of doing so that were entering the Foreign Service was that we have a lot of flaws, right, in our government institution, but it is, in comparison to others, still one of the better deals to have in the world. And that's where we need to focus. We've made a lot of mistakes over the years, but again, I think we have a tendency, and I'll turn it over to you to comment on that, to sort of overlook our own deep-seated contradictions and own hypocrisies over time. I mean, have we really been about democracy and individual rights? Or has it been, over time, well, he who has the goal makes the rule, so to say. We'll twist it around if we can.
There's no doubt. And if you look at things like the Mexican-American War, for instance, which Robert F. Kennedy says was one of the most embarrassing and terrible things, I'm paraphrasing, that we've ever done. The whole, when we created the Constitution, we counted slaves as one third of a person and all those things, yes. But we have addressed those issues, or we had. After World War II, we became the predominant power in the world, struggled with the Soviet Union and came on time. I think we've done a lot to address those deficiencies. I think we did promote democracy and promote our values, human rights, equality. But now a lot of this stuff has become dirty words. And the efforts that we made in overcoming our past mistakes now, I see, my very personal opinion, been rolled back to where we were before. And I think that's a very dangerous and that's a very bad thing. I think that we really need to examine. I think the United States of America has to basically really become very introspective. And I think most citizens, I hope, would take the time to reflect on where we are now and how we got here. And acknowledging our past is certainly part of that. And that's why I don't understand why, for instance, the national parks, old references to slavery have been removed, things that have been removed in Smithsonian, and other things that it seems to be we're trying to deny our past or perhaps rewrite them in a way. I do find all that somewhat disturbing.
Speaking specifically to leadership, institutional integrity, what would you identify from your experiences, areas of improvement, to borrow a caption from the employee evaluation phase? What would be areas of improvement for the U.S. Department of State as an institution? And let me contextualize that a little more. And this is independent of the current administration. Things that you observed over your time that the Department of State could actually do better, but they still had not.
Right. I think one of the, and this is going to sound kind of like a heresy, but I think the over reliance on things like the Foreign Affairs Manual, the FAM, that over dependence on that. You need rules and regulations, but you also need common sense. And I think in a lot of practical matters, the Department of State was too over formalized, too over bureaucratized, uh, and ignore sometimes uh, common sense, also in recruitment. Just because a guy scores well on a test or can write two sentences in proper form doesn't mean that he's going to be a good leader and lead a mission or manage a crisis. So I think some of the recruitment and needed effort and training. I think lack of expertise. I think there's a good thing in being available for worldwide uh, duty, but there's also something to be said for specializing in one region of the world or one, separating the political aspects of it. I think how we did this whole yearly evaluation reform forms needs to be looked at again. They're looking at it in some strange ways now. But yeah, and the other thing I think is vital that we have been so remiss in over the decades that I've observed in this State Department. We don't sell ourselves to the American people.
Hmm.
We don't. People watch that show on Netflix. The diplomat about the ambassador, and yeah, pretty cool, accurate representation of some of the dynamic, but other of it is kind of silly. But we don't sell ourselves. We don't. We try. We do the hometown diplomat program, where guys when they come back on leave to talk. But there's no really effort to explain how what we do is important to everyday Americans. I don't have a quick and snappy answer on how we improve that, but I think when things get back to normal and we start looking at how to better things, that's something we have to do is how we sell our image to our own people.
Well, on that note, do you have a quick and snappy statement that you would want to convey to folks out there? What is the U.S. Foreign Service, and why is it important? And lest people forget, it was the first executive cabinet established when the United States was formed.
I go back to something that, and I'm not being partisan by saying this, that President Obama said once. The world cannot do important things without the U.S., and the U.S. cannot do important things without the rest of the world. We need contact. America first should not be America alone. And I think that we have to concentrate on our alliances, our getting along with people, our sound economic policy, sound alliance policy. We have NATO, which is the most successful treaty organization in humankind history, just about. And we should stick to things like that. And getting along with your neighbors is good for your economy. It's good for everyday Americans' pockets. It's good for everything. We cannot be isolationist, and what let happen in the 1930s when we tried that experiment didn't work out very well. And so being isolationist and being America alone is not a good idea.
Okay, and again, why is the Foreign Service important? What would you want someone out in Montana to know? Who's focused on saving his family farm because his or her children they're not interested in farming. Uh, how would the Foreign Service? How would you relate the Foreign Service to that individual out there as an
Because the
example?
Foreign Service also, when we're in embassies, we are promoting American business. We are promoting American exports. We're supporting an even playing field so that our products, our businesses, our interests are treated as well or better than anyone else's. The Foreign Service has always been America first. That's been our what we're supposed to do, and uh, making sure that farmer who has our embassy in China lobbying and negotiating and pressing the Chinese government to purchase more American soybeans or wheat or whatever it is that farmer is selling and to keep his farm going. Uh, that's part of our job, and that's how it affects everyone. I mean, the say NAFTA or what would we call the USMCA now or whatever it is. You know how many jobs that provides in Texas? Uh, Keeping the border open, keeping it for commerce, for the economy. It, hundreds of thousands of jobs in the United States. Tens of thousands alone in Mexico are directly tied to trade between Mexico and the U.S. So yes, we do affect everyday Americans' life in many ways, and we have to do better explaining that.
As we come to a close, what's a lesson that you learned from a subordinate that impacted you productively as a leader?
To try to be use a little bit of humility, to be open to suggestions, to keep an open door whenever possible, and to listen to people. I think that's all. Treating everyone, you can't treat everyone exactly the same, in the sense that this guy is better when you're alone with him and you are enthusiastic about him. Another guy may need a little bit more of a push, but the rules should apply for everyone.
Any advice to professionals serving in complex environments today, whether they're in government or in business or the nonprofit sector?
I think you've got to stick to your values, stick to your principles, and stick to your mission as much as possible, and try to avoid the noise and the chaff that's all around you. It's a very complex period that we're in right now, and we have to kind of just hold fast and stick with it.
Well, sir, deeply appreciate you sharing your experiences and observations with us. Do you have any parting thoughts?
No, I just think that what you're doing is great. You've got a fan now. I certainly will be tuning in, and if I can ever be of any help to you, our lives have many interesting intersections in them, and I truly appreciate and enjoyed speaking with you.
Well, it's been a privilege speaking to you as well. To our listeners again, this is a conversation we've had with retired U.S. Ambassador Luis Moreno. And to our listeners, thank you for joining us on Brungart Law's Lagniappe, where we provide a little extra perspective because the devil's always in the details. Please invite others to listen and let me know what you think via the link. Sir, again, gratitude.
Oh, gratitude to you. Thank you very much, and good luck.